a catastrophe for Canadian steel. That's the stark warning from industry leaders, according to Reuters. Tens of thousands of jobs vanish, reports Al Jazeera, as Canadian unemployment holds at a worrying 6.9%. On the other side of the border, the Wall Street Journal chronicles an American auto industry under immense pressure, with stalwarts like Stellantis idling hundreds of workers in Michigan. The integrated supply chain that once defined North American strength has become a weapon. Steel, the very backbone of a continent's industry, is now at the heart of an economic war between two of the world's closest allies. How did the foundation of a century of shared prosperity crack seemingly overnight? For over half a century, the economic heart of North America beat to a single synchronized rhythm. The border between the US and Canada wasn't a barrier, it was a seam. Forged by agreements like the 1965 Auto Pact, a continental manufacturing ecosystem was born. A car frame might be stamped in Ohio, fitted with an engine from Ontario, and have its transmission assembled in Michigan, crossing the border multiple times seamlessly before it was considered a finished product. This integration wasn't just about efficiency, it was a symbol of shared prosperity. The industrial might of the American Rust Belt was inextricably linked to the manufacturing centers of southern Ontario. They were two parts of the same engine, a model of cross-border industrial harmony that powered millions of jobs and fortified the world's largest trading relationship. But by the late 20th century, the engine began to sputter. The forces of globalization and competition from overseas started to erode this industrial base on both sides of the border. The term Rust Belt became synonymous with decay, a narrative of decline that seeped into the political consciousness of Michigan and Ohio. While trade agreements like NAFTA deepened the continental integration, they also heightened anxieties about manufacturing job losses. This simmering discontent slowly curdled into a new, more aggressive economic nationalism. The idea of a shared engine gave way to a zero-sum game. The first real tremor came in 2018, with the Trump administration's Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, citing national security. Though a deal was eventually reached, the foundation had been permanently cracked. The trust was broken, setting a precedent that collaboration could be abandoned for confrontation at a moment's notice. The first tremors of this earthquake were felt in 2018, but the seismic shockwave came in the summer of 2025. It wasn't a nuanced policy shift debated in the quiet halls of Congress. It was a political declaration of war, delivered with the force of a wrecking ball. The Trump administration, channeling the long-simmering anxieties of the American Rust Belt, announced its intention to escalate the trade dispute with its northern neighbor to an unprecedented level. The existing 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum, a measure that had already strained relations, was suddenly threatened with a doubling to 50%. The official justification was, once again, national security under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. The argument posited that a robust domestic steel industry is essential for national defense, and that reliance on foreign imports, even from an ally as close as Canada, poses an unacceptable risk. But for the voters in Michigan and Ohio, this was about something far more visceral. It was about economic survival. For decades, they had watched as factories shuttered and jobs moved overseas, a decline that a Brookings Institution study noted had accelerated even under Trump's first term, with Michigan losing 55,000 manufacturing jobs and Ohio 26,000, largely due to previous trade wars. The promise to punish foreign competitors and bring those jobs back was a powerful, intoxicating message. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., was cast not as a partner, but as a primary enabler of this decline. The administration's narrative was simple and brutal. Canadian steel, often produced at a lower cost, was undercutting American mills, forcing them to close and lay off American workers. The proposed 50% tariff was designed to be a kill switch, to make Canadian steel so prohibitively expensive that American auto manufacturers and construction firms would have no choice but to buy American. It was a direct intervention aimed at rewiring the continent's industrial logic overnight, forcing a reshoring of the entire supply chain. In this political calculus, the decades of integration were irrelevant. The potential for retaliatory action and the collateral damage to American industries that depended on Canadian steel were secondary concerns, dismissed as the necessary short-term price for long-term industrial revival. It was a strategy born from a potent mix of genuine economic grievance in states like Michigan and Ohio, and a populist, America First ideology that viewed the deeply integrated North American supply chain not as a strength, but as a vulnerability to be severed. Across the border, the news landed not as a policy proposal, but as a profound betrayal. In Ottawa, Toronto, and the steel towns of Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie, the reaction was a mix of shock, fury, and existential dread. Canadian business leaders and unions immediately labeled the threat catastrophic. From their perspective, the American national security argument was absurd. Canadian steel wasn't a threat, it was part of the same body. For generations, the two countries' steel and manufacturing sectors had operated as a single, intricate machine. Canadian iron ore was shipped to American mills, American coal powered Canadian factories, steel forged in Ontario was sent to Michigan to become the frame of a Ford F-150. This wasn't competition, it was codependence. The idea that Canada was somehow undermining American security was seen as a transparently false pretext for pure protectionism. The immediate human cost became terrifyingly clear. As reported by Al Jazeera, the Canadian economy was already fragile, having shed 40,800 jobs in July 2025, with the manufacturing sector taking a significant hit. The tariff threat promised to turn a downturn into a freefall. Companies like Algoma Steel and Canada Metal Processing Group, already forced into work-sharing programs and hiring freezes due to the earlier 25% tariff, now faced the prospect of mass layoffs. For the tens of thousands of Canadians whose livelihoods depended on the steel industry, this wasn't an abstract trade dispute. It was a direct threat to their ability to pay their mortgages and feed their families. The Canadian government found itself in an impossible position. To capitulate would be to sacrifice a cornerstone of its economy. To retaliate, the standard response in trade disputes, would mean engaging in a mutually destructive economic war with its largest trading partner, a conflict Canada was almost certain to lose. The sentiment on the ground was one of deep injustice. They had played by the rules of an integrated market they had helped build, only to be punished for their efficiency. The narrative coming from Washington, painting them as villains stealing American jobs, felt like a gaslighting campaign on an international scale. The reality, as they saw it, was that their success was America's success, and this move was akin to an act of economic self-harm by their closest friend and ally. And so the two nations were locked in a dangerous standoff, a high-stakes economic game of chicken with no clear off-ramp. For the United States, backing down from the 50% tariff threat would be a significant political climb down, an admission that the aggressive strategy was flawed and damaging to the very industries it claimed to protect. It would alienate the Rust Belt base that viewed the tariffs as a long-overdue defense of their way of life. For Canada, the dilemma was even more acute. Accepting the tariffs would mean signing a death warrant for a vital sector of their economy, triggering widespread job losses and a potential recession. Yet, engaging in a full-blown trade war with the United States was unthinkable, a desperate gamble that could inflict even greater economic pain on the entire country. They were trapped, forced to choose between two catastrophic outcomes. The integrated supply chain, once a source of mutual strength and a symbol of continental partnership, had been twisted into a weapon of economic warfare. The foundation of shared prosperity had fractured, leaving both sides staring into an abyss of disruption and uncertainty, with no easy path back to stability. The question was no longer who would win, but how much both would lose. This is not an abstract economic theory for communities like Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. For over a century, the town's heartbeat has been the rhythm of the Algoma steel mill. It's more than an employer, it's the city's identity, its central nervous system. When the first round of tariffs hit in 2018, the shock was immediate. The company, like others, resorted to stopgap measures, hiring freezes and government-assisted work-sharing programs designed to avoid the guillotine of mass layoffs by reducing hours for everyone. It was a community holding its collective breath, but the threat of a 50% tariff was a death sentence. The grim national statistics reported by Al Jazeera: 40,800 jobs lost in a single month, a stubborn 6.9% unemployment rate, nearly 10,000 manufacturing positions erased year over year, are lived realities here. For every steelworker whose hours are cut or whose job disappears, the ripple effect is devastating. It's the local trucking company that hauls the steel, the diner that serves the workers breakfast, the small businesses on Queen Street that rely on their spending. The word catastrophe, used by industry leaders in reports from Reuters, isn't hyperbole. It's a precise description of the cascading failure that ripples through a town when its economic heart is deliberately stopped. This is the human cost of the trade war. It's the gnawing uncertainty that replaces pride, the fear that a century of hard work and cross-border partnership can be erased by a political decision made hundreds of miles away. This isn't just about protecting a domestic industry. For towns like Sault-Ste. Marie, it's about the deliberate dismantling of their entire way of life, leaving a void of economic despair and a profound sense of betrayal. The cruel irony of this economic war is that the weapon fired at Canada created immediate, self-inflicted wounds back in the United States. The policy was sold as a shield for American industry, but it quickly became a double-edged sword. Nowhere is this paradox clearer than in Dearborn, Michigan. Just miles from the great auto plants, Cleveland-Cliffs, a giant of American steel, was forced to do the unthinkable: lay off 600 workers at its Dearborn facility. This wasn't because of a flood of cheap Canadian imports. It was because of a lack of orders from its biggest customers, the American automakers. The logic is as simple as it is brutal. The tariffs, by design, raised the price of steel. For the American auto industry, which accounts for roughly 20% of Michigan's entire GDP according to the Wall Street Journal, this meant a sudden spike in the cost of its most crucial raw material. Facing higher costs and supply chain chaos, automakers did what businesses do: they slowed down. Stellantis, the parent company of Jeep and Chrysler, idled 900 workers across Michigan and Indiana. As the assembly lines slowed, so did the orders for steel. Suddenly, Cleveland-Cliffs found itself with a shrinking order book. The very policy meant to protect it from foreign competition had crippled its domestic customer base, leading directly to over 1,000 layoffs across its operations in Michigan and Minnesota. This wasn't a Canadian problem bleeding over the border. This was a direct consequence of a policy that failed to recognize a fundamental truth of the North American economy. You cannot break one link in the chain without weakening the entire structure. For the 600 workers in Dearborn, the promise of America First resulted in an American pink slip. The weaponization of the integrated North American economy has left both nations bleeding, trapped in a standoff of their own making. A policy intended to be a shield for the American Rust Belt has become a sword that cuts both ways, costing jobs in Michigan while devastating communities in Ontario. The continent now stands at a historic crossroads. The question is no longer simply about tariffs or trade balances, but about its fundamental identity. Will these two nations, forged by a century of shared prosperity, choose to rebuild the foundation they shattered, or will they continue down separate, fractured paths forever defined by this economic divorce? Let us know what you think will happen next in the comments below. And if this story was important to you, please like this video, comment, and subscribe to the channel.